Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on sustainable viticulture at Peter Lehmann's. For those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Carmel Klein and I work for Casella Family Brands Europe. I work in the role of technical, but part of that remit is I look after the sustainability needs for our customers within Europe and work very closely with the team in Australia in terms of the priorities on their sustainability agenda. So just so that you're aware, we're going to be recording this webinar today, and this will be available from your reps at the end of the presentation. So just a little bit about context about Peter Lehmann. Most of you will probably be familiar with the brand. It's a multi-award winning set of wines from the Barossa Valley. And it was started in 1979. And at that time, there was a very, very close working relationship with all of the growers. And that has been maintained through the entire history of the brand. It's still a family-owned wine company. And there are over 100 growers that work very closely with the team at Peter Lehmann's. And in terms of my own personal experience, I was lucky enough to visit Peter Lehmann Winery on my first visit to Australia around the year 2000. And I was being taken around by an MW, being shown some of the most prestigious wineries in Australia in terms of their regions. And at the time, I was struck by the elegance of the wine. And I remember commenting to the winemaker, at the time, Mr. Wigan, that, complimenting him on his winemaking skills. And he very much said that this is about the quality of the grape and the relationship with the grower. So that's always been in my mind about one of the hallmarks of Peter Lehmann Wines. So fast forward then to 2024, they have a quite well developed sustainability agenda, and that covers energy and relationship with community and looking after planet. But key to that is the relationship with the growers and their sustainability agenda. And that takes me on very nicely to Jade Rogge. And Jade is the viticulturist at Peter Lehmann's, but she's also a trained winemaker as well as a viticulturist, and she's got over 25 vintages under her belt. She's started in the Yarra Valley and has, I think, worked in New Zealand for about 10 years and then has returned and has been working for Peter Lehmann for over 5 years now. And Jade is very much on the day-to-day aspect of managing and working with the growers. So she is in a very good position to talk about sort of cutting edge approaches to sustainable viticulture. So with that in mind, I will hand over to Jade.
Hi everyone, welcome. I'm obviously down here in Australia. Well, it's this evening here for me and this morning for you guys, but look forward to running through, I guess, a little bit of what we do, and thanks Carmel for that that brief introduction. I guess following on from that, I have now done 5 vintages with Peter Lehmann's here in the Barossa. We came back out from New Zealand at the end of 2017 for a bit of a lifestyle change and kind of reconnect with our family who was out here after quite a long stint away in New Zealand, and obviously I do carry a very New Zealand accent because I'm a dual citizen. I have an Australian mum and a Kiwi dad, so I've had the best of both worlds, not just through life but also through my career. The last sort of 5 years in the Barossa have been interesting. They have been challenging, very challenging. I came in when there was significant drought conditions, the hangover from 2018 and 19. Then we moved into some wetter years, and now we're sort of through the cycle. We're heading back into some drier years again, so some more drought conditions. So yeah, it's been a really interesting time, and there's been a lot of growth and a lot of change for the brand, for the growers, for myself, for my colleagues in quite a short period of time, as the company kind of takes on, I guess, a new direction in sustainability. They sort of, the focus is shifting, not just globally, but that then impacts us, sort of directly within the region. So yeah, look, over the next 10-15 minutes, I'm just going to run through, I guess, some sort of key focuses on what we're working in down here in the Barossa, and in some aspects the greater South Australia. I guess a little bit more about our brand, a little bit more about our grower base, because it's very, very unique to us as a brand, and we're very fortunate here in the Barossa to have that grower base that we do. So I'm sort of going to flick through some slides, kind of talk along the way, and then towards the end there'll be an opportunity for you to flick through some questions if you want. More than happy to answer those. I think they're probably a really good way to, maybe think about something different or throw something out there for you all. So bit of a brief agenda, a little bit about our story, as I said, what are we doing growing sustainability, and I guess what's next. That's always a big question. We do have a very broad grower base from northern to southern Barossa that extends out into the Eden Valley. So, we're very, very fortunate that back in the mid-1970s, Peter Lehmann, our founder, the founder of the brand and the company, he sort of, I guess, he had a vision. He could see that, the industry in the Barossa was really struggling, but ultimately for him it was looking after the growers. He could see that, that things were getting tough, and the biggest impact that tough times have is on growers, on their families, on their vineyards, and where that where those grapes are going to go. So he took a bit of a leap of faith, and he started Peter Lehmann's, and with that he took a huge amount of growers with him, I guess with the promise of a bit of stability, a place that their grapes could go, and through various paths over those first few years they sort of navigated it together. And I mean, that foundation that Peter set up back then with those growers still stands today, some 48 years later. We still have many of those same founding families growing for us today. And I guess that's the uniqueness that we have as a brand. Not a lot of companies, if many, can actually claim that they still have the same grower base that they've had for almost 50 years. So, we really cherish those foundations. We really cherish those relationships. It's a huge part of my job on a day-to-day basis, is, not just working with those growers and, buying their fruit, but actually it goes a lot deeper than that. The relationship's about trust. That goes both ways. It's about them believing, I guess, in our journey now under a new private ownership. Them really kind of getting on board with the change we want to make. You've got to remember, a lot of these families have been around for a long time. Most of my growers are 5th and 6th generation. I do have one 7th generation. We have a few newer guys who are only sort of 3rd generation, but the majority of our growers, we are dealing with very, very generational sort of farmers. So, there's been a lot of carry, sort of hangover and take home from their previous, grandfathers, great grandfathers. But, we're moving into, I guess, a new way of doing things, and we really have to take our growers along for that journey. So, they really have to trust in what we're doing as a brand, and as a company. So making sure that that we know what we're doing, I suppose, you could see it that way. So a little bit about Barossa. I'm sure most of you know where it is, but we sort of lie in the kind of south, mid-south of Australia. We're quite a small state. The Barossa Valley itself is about 80 kilometres north of Adelaide, which is in effect the capital of South Australia. That's our main hub. For those of you who may have had the luxury of being here, is where you fly in and out of. We are home to some of the oldest vines in the world, which is fascinating given given the context between Australia and Europe. We have a very significant diversity of subregions. So we have over 30 regions within the Barossa Valley alone. And that in itself has layers upon layers of complexity, diversity. We're able to tap into different styles from different subregions. You know, sometimes we'll find weather events will affect one region and not another. You know, so it allows us to really sort of pick and choose across the valley floor. Again, something that's quite unique to us, that the breadth and the spread of our growers across the valley is not something that's particularly common here. That was something that was foreseen by Peter and the earlier winemakers of Peter Lehmann. They kind of, you know, identified really key subregions within the Barossa and felt that they were areas where they could make the styles and, you know, the kind of the emerging wines that were coming through at the time. And what that's allowed us now is this base, this really good footprint within some very key subregions, and in particular one region, Light Pass region here, we pretty much have probably 90% of the fruit supply from that region, just because it was identified by Peter and the earlier winemakers, and I guess for better words, they locked it up. They gathered those growers, and they, you know, they made sure that sort of became ours, and we had a lot of access to that fruit. So that's pretty, you know, that's pretty unique and pretty exciting for us. So I suppose we move into a little bit about sustainability, and I guess I feel like for me, probably the last 12 months especially, this has just been getting stronger and stronger. It's becoming more and more a part of my job. You know, it's something that we've been building on for a few years, but we really gave it a bit of a kickstart. Not that, you know, it feels like not that long ago. So it's been certainly a key focus. But you know, our philosophy as a company at Peter Lehmann's and the greater brands is about sustainable viticulture. You know, it's sort of, you know, supports long-term, you know, environmental health. It's about the community. It's about, you know, what are we doing? How are we achieving the right wine quality? What footprint are we leaving in our vineyards? What footprint are we leaving in our wineries? You know, how are we kind of, you know, how are we making sure that there's, you know, that there's a really good future there for future generations, and you know, and then the flip side to that is, you know, what does that look like coming into our wines? How's that improving our quality? So there's so many aspects from a future perspective. You know, we definitely have invested a lot in expertise. Our winemaking team and our viticulture team, you know, we have some really smart and invested people in our business, and who are really behind this and very engaging. So I guess we're pretty fortunate in that aspect, and you know, again, that's pretty unique. We have people that really want to make it better, and you know, what's the economic viability of that? You know, how do we ensure for our growers that, you know, that they can have continuous growth, but also it's, you know, it's viable for them, that they can continue to farm, you know, and viable for their future generations, which is something, you know, I sort of have to deal with on quite a daily basis with the team. They, you know, I call the team my growers. So this is a couple of our growers here, that the Scholes family. Now, interestingly enough, Peter Scholes is actually a former winemaker, and he's still a wine ambassador for our brand. So this gives you the kind of depth of, I guess, the depth of our relationships. So Peter was actually one of the original winemakers who worked with Peter Lehmann, so he has a big foundation. He's now handing over to Jack, his son, on the left of your screens there, and that's a really exciting time for us because Peter has this wealth of knowledge with our grower base. He's incredibly valuable for us in the aspect of what I do on a day-to-day basis, and has been in building my relationships as someone coming in sort of 5 years ago, and now I'm watching that transition of his family, where, you know, his younger son is sort of taking over, and that's that generational change that we're seeing across multiple families. You know, as I touched on before, we do have a big network. They are generational farmers. You know, they have so much more history that I can ever kind of appreciate. You know, not just the stories, but the changes over time. You know, how they've adapted to continue to still be viable, to still, you know, be growing the right varieties, be growing, you know, the right tons, you know, making sure that it meets the wine's quality. So, you know, having that kind of history with the likes of the Scholes families, pretty unique. So across our wider sort of business, we have over 150 growers. That's 30 GIs within Australia, which involves, you know, 40 odd grape varieties. So a significant span of grape supply. About 18 months ago, we entered into a partnership with Southern Premium Vineyards, and that was really to continue to ensure that we sort of had a really high quality, continuous long-term supply of grapes, and we work with them very closely because they are a significant grower. They are really a grower. The relationship just runs a bit deeper than that. But you know that they spread across many areas across South Australia, and significantly in the Barossa. So we work with them very closely. We still own nearly 2,000 hectares of vineyards, and a lot of them are in the Barossa. So over 700 hectares are still within South Australia, and near on just under 100 hectares in the Barossa. So it allows us that access to those sort of premium grape growing regions, and obviously with our own vineyards, you know, we're able to kind of, I guess be a bit of a give a bit of an objective view to our growers, you know, like, hey, we're doing this on our own sites, and you know, we're not just asking you to do it, but we're actually doing it ourselves. So it gives us kind of, I guess, a bit of a footprint to be an example, which is great. You know, in the Barossa, we kind of get growers to come even into our own vineyards and sort of show them what we're doing, or what is very typical here in the Barossa is everyone's looking over each other's fences. So it doesn't go unnoticed what you're up to in such a, you know, what is quite a small community. So one of the major I guess impacts, or the major areas of sustainability that we have been working on for a while is around water conservation. And you know, it's one thing. It's a, you know, it's a bit of a difficult thing in a region like Barossa. We had a scheme, or a water scheme, put in about 12 years ago, where growers were able to tap into a water system that supplies water into the Barossa, and many of our growers did. You know, the majority of our growers did, but some didn't. You know, we have growers that might grow 3 to 5 tonne, and we have growers that grow up to maybe 300 tonnes. So you know, sometimes that investment to get into that water scheme was maybe a little bit cost prohibitive. So it wasn't for everyone, but what it enabled, I guess, is a long-term vision on being able to supply water into the Barossa. You know, our bores, we had salinity issues starting to appear. You know, we sort of had low flow through drought years. It could get a little bit difficult, you know, maybe not quite enough water to get through. So that extra scheme that's come into the Barossa has allowed us to not just expand as a region, but just as a grower, I guess, you know, it's enabled us, you know, as growers here, to continue to see a future and you know that we can still grow grapes. Some of the things we're sort of working on, you know, a pretty big one that we've actually just, I guess we've just started to use as the season, you know, we sort of had bud bursts about 4 weeks ago now. And so this new system we've been starting to use and test, and that's reusing the winery wastewater. So the winery obviously has a significant amount of water that, you know, once they've cleaned tanks, flushed drains, all the stormwater off all of our buildings. So what we do is we capture that water, we actually treat that water, and then we can filter it and use it again in the vineyards. So we've just sort of done that, like I said, this season, and you know, we're capturing we've got an 11 megalitre dam that we capture that into, and what that's given us is the ability, our vineyards surrounding the winery, which is about 21 hectares of vineyards, near on 50 odd acres for those of you in speaking in that terms, but also 4 hectares of lawn around our cellar door, around our winery buildings. So we're actually able to, we're basically, our ideal is that we use our water twice. So we're working on that kind of initiative of, not just sort of wasting it off into dams and then flooding out. We're actually able to use that for quite necessary means. We want to have nice green lawns around our cellar door where our visitors come from. We need water in our vineyards. So we've actually been able to do that this year, and it's running really successfully at the moment. It was a big sort of investment on our behalf, and obviously winery wastewater systems have been around for a long time, and this was a way at which we could kind of expand on that and sort of go a little bit further. So that's something really cool that we've been working on, kind of linking vineyard and winery. Something else that we've invested really heavily in the last sort of 5 or 6 years is actually soil moisture monitoring systems across our vineyards. So what we ideally, we want to see what's happening beneath the ground, and that's something you can't do with your eyes. So we've invested systems that can basically give us the soil moisture readings from sort of 10 centimetres to a metre, and that then allows us more precision on how much irrigation that we're putting on our vineyards. So, beforehand, I guess it was a bit more of a guess. We've got growers investing in that technology now. That there's various technology out there that can be used, but we've now got growers getting on board with that. There's a lot of communication going when people are talking. What are you seeing in your soils? What are we seeing in our soils? What are you seeing over the fence? So that's allowed us, kind of much more precision around what we're doing. Another thing that's just, I guess, getting more and more popular is undervine mulching. Now that can be composting, where we've basically, we're actually using winery waste from vintage, like our stalks or our marc. That's then getting composted with other materials. There are other things put into that, and then that's getting put back on the vineyard. And what that does ultimately is that helps sort of reduce the evaporation. It holds water in longer. It also, that coupled with getting our growers to plant permanent swards in the middle of the rows of their grapes is allowing sort of a reduction on compaction. It's reducing erosion. It used to be very dusty here, and everyone was mid-row. So we probably have now over 80% of our growers are actually, putting down a permanent sward in their vineyard, investing in technology that allows them to really manage their water use. It is a precious, precious resource, and, we need it for grapes. We need it to be able to be viable. So it's some pretty exciting stuff going on in that space around water use. It kind of leads us in. I think soil and vine management and water management are pretty much coupled together. They really do. It starts from the soil down, in my mind. And one thing that we've really started to do is minimise the use of insecticides and herbicides, and we've really been working on that as a company for about the last 20 years. We don't want to be effectively, and from a sustainability perspective, we don't want to be, kind of overhandling or overusing chemicals within our sites. It just, at the end of the day, it's all about soil health. Everything starts from the ground up, and if we don't have that microbial activity, we kind of have what I call dead soils, or dead life. Not a lot wants to grow there, and when you're trying to grow a grapevine there, that becomes pretty important. We have, I mentioned before about the mid-row crops, and just improving soil health there builds in a lot more organic matter, and just brings those soils to life. We've been working a fair bit on pruning techniques in the Barossa, trying to, I guess, identify sort of the ideal canopy densities to let enough light in, to have it open, to prevent diseases so we don't have to spray as much, to improve our wine quality, and with more light, sort of better ripeness levels, better, better sort of skin conditions, and ultimately leading into better fruit at the end of the day. So we're working quite heavily there on cane versus spur, you know, kind of the architecture that's really changed a lot over time. You know, we're introducing things like we're having 2 catch wires in our vineyard, very, very unique for Australia, and that's something as a company and as for our grower base we've really promoted doing. So it's been, you know, that's been quite quickly uptaken, because I think people can see the effects of, you know, rather than the full sprawled canopy that really opens up and can be very strongly affected by sunlight, we now have a more dappled light canopy sort of architecture that we're using. So, I mentioned the byproducts from the winery. Like I say, we're reusing where we can. You know, what we take out, we would really like to be putting back in. So all those stalks and stems and marc that come out when you produce wine, we're ideally putting that back into the vineyard under the you know, production of compost. So we're using a bit of precision viticulture out there now. We have some growers who are using it with their sprayers, so with their spray carts. And you know, I just had a grower call me today and say he's had a 45% reduction in use on his first spray round by using precision viticulture on his sprayer, which is fantastic. And obviously as the canopy grows, that'll sort of reduce to 5 or 10% later in the season. But we've really got, you know, and especially that the younger generation, they're really hungry to, I guess, make a bit of an impact. And, you know, this particular grower I'm going to talk about in a minute on another project they're working on. But, you know, he's come through, he's just been born and raised in the Barossa. He has worked for dad since he left, or mum and dad since he left high school. He, you know, and he's just got this real hunger to change and to bring new things in and you know, to adapt his site. They're a fantastic grower. They grow, you know, really super premium grapes, and you know, he wants to continue doing that for the rest of his life, so and probably his children's lives. So, you know, it's something that we're big on, you know, in promoting that biodiversity, and in this particular family has gone into a worm farm. Some other things that we've been working on as well. We got into wildlife for wine about 2.5 years ago now, and that's included planting sort of 2,500 native trees around our winery and vineyard. So it's quite a large site, and we've also introduced microbat huts to bring in some sort of, you know, that biodiversity. We have a lot of tree life there. We want to be bringing back in those birds and things that have probably gone as understories have been removed over the years. So we're now introducing those back in to try and, you know, create a bit more life and bring back all of those beneficial insects and you know, some of that lovely bird life out there. We have, as a company, we've just been involved in, we call them sort of corporate giving partnerships, but what we were really looking for was local community initiatives that we could support. And look, that didn't just involve, you know, biodiversity efforts. It was, you know, it was the greater region and the greater community. And we were really excited because Barossa Wildlife Rescue, so they sort of got a nice, you know, grant from us that they're going to use to build some new aviaries, and then we were able to invest with Barossa Landscape Board, and that will go into a really large sort of broader community project that we're actually doing a lot of planting and a lot of regeneration, and you know, we're really excited to work with them over the next couple of years as they invest that grant into areas. Another one that I'm probably going to take on pretty personally is the McLaren Vale regeneration of the Maslin Creek. Now, the Maslin Creek runs through a big portion of sort of western McLaren Vale. We do own vineyards down there as well, and the creek does run through our vineyard. Now, it's a creek that has kind of been left to, it's been overgrown, it's got a weed infestation, and the McLaren Vale Biodiversity Group, we supported with a quite a large grant, and they're going to be investing that money into regeneration of that Maslin Creek, and on the back of that, we're going to be joining them on our own property and actually the regeneration of our portion of that creek. So I'm really excited about that project, and I think that's something you know, for the future to keep an eye on for Peter Lehmann's and our greater greater group. So just a little bit of the case study that I wanted to talk to you about. That's the Schrappel family who I was just talking to you about before. So they're kind of our worm farmers. They got into this a couple of years ago, and just in a bit of a brief, this is a picture of them here and their worm farm, and just looking at some grapes in their vineyard. But they're using composted household waste on a small scale. So they've sort of got about 3 pods that generate about 400 to 500 kilos of castings. So they're producing about 1,000 litres of worm juice every sort of 3 or 4 weeks. And they then mix that with molasses to sort of feed it and regenerate it over a few hours. And then they're actually fertigating. So they're actually punching that out through their water system directly into their vineyard, and they target about 30 to 40 litres per hectare, and they do roughly 5 applications a season, so kind of a post-vintage, a kind of late winter, and then several during the growing season. And I guess, you know, my sort of questions for them over time has sort of been, what have you been seeing from it? And they said, you know, look, that the natural kind of microbial activity has just increased so much. Like, they're actually seeing worms and life back in their soils. You know, they're not got moss and kind of, I guess, dead looking soils that have just been farmed and not taken care of. And what they're seeing, you know, they're even seeing just an increase in weed growth under vines. So there's just so much more life there. You know, and one thing I think is that they're seeing that activity, and that's ultimately leading to kind of a more good feel in their vineyard. They feel that their vineyard's got a bit more life, and as such, and that's kind of feeding through to the vines. You know, the vines just look more vibrant, they have better colour, and that's then transpiring to the fruit. So that's a bit of a cool thing happening with one of our growers here, which is pretty exciting. So the other thing, I guess, that we're really jumping on board with, a few of you have probably heard by now about Sustainable Wine Growing Australia. You know, look, we are working towards certification. Now, that's something that involves all of our growers. It involves our wineries, it involves our own vineyards. It really is a company-wide sort of initiative. I think it's something, you know, I look at my history and other sort of certifications I've been involved with, and this one just allows, you know, that kind of one stamp for Australia, that ability to all be across one certification from a global perspective. So that's something that we've been working on really hard with our growers, and we have growers, you know, I've had about 6 growers this week get certified. So we're moving at a really fast rate here. The uptake has been significant from our growers. You know, obviously we're really helping them the whole way through the process. They are pretty excited, I think, now as well, that they're getting their certifications, and they can kind of see that, you know, they can see the benefits and they can see the changes that they can make. So I'm really excited to work with them on that, you know, over the coming years as we kind of grow and develop that program together. But, you know, as a brand, we're really committed. As a team, we're really committed to sustainability. We're constantly looking at innovative ideas. We're constantly looking at ways to kind of change things to bring in. We're looking at technology that's out there, maybe mechanically, you know, or just vine husbandry, on how we can move forward and change. And you know, those partnerships with our growers, they help us regenerate and ultimately protect the Barossa. I think that's a big part, that our growers they don't just see it for themselves, they see it for the future generations, and we do as a brand as well. So we continue to evolve. We continue to focus on long-term impacts, both environmental and how that affects wine quality. And you know, we continue to sort of engage with our grower base. So yeah, I hope that's been enjoyable. I hope I haven't got too much over time. Carmel's not giving me funny faces, so I will. I'll hand back over to Carmel and see if we've had any questions come through.
Jade, thanks a million for that. That's been really interesting. And I think what really strikes me is within Barossa, there's a wonderful marriage of science and technology, and yet respect for the past and looking at natural solutions to revive soils, and that's really struck with me. And I love the idea of worm juice. It's very Halloweeny, so very good. Now,
very unique. It's very unique.
Yeah. I'm sure the soils love it, so that's what really matters.
That they do, absolutely.
We've got a couple of questions, and one of the aspects that's been highlighted is Australia has had historically some challenges with salinity. And I know this from my own studies between my wine diploma and my MW studies, I did a dissertation on water availability and water challenges within South Australia. And at that time, it was something that growers were working with to see how they could deal with that. I was wondering, is the Barossa particularly affected, and what can be done about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's something that there's a long history in Australia as a whole, and as far as Barossa's effect, it started to really take hold until we introduced that new water scheme that I mentioned earlier, because what they were finding is, as I said, the bore levels were dropping, the salinity was rising. Drought conditions or dry conditions also increase salinity, but when there's been no rains to sort of flush that sodium through the soil, what we tend to find is that kind of rears its head. Now, one good thing with grapevines is, if we've had a good flushing rain and the salts are kind of pushed through on those more susceptible sites, we actually don't see the impacts, and there's no hangover, there's no carryover. So as soon as those salts are flushed through the soil, we actually don't see the resultant wine. So typically the impacts of salinity here aren't significant in a lot of vineyards. It is very specific to certain sites and certain subregions and certain soils that have more of those issues than we typically see across a lot of regions. Now, with the ability of that better water quality that we're using from that scheme, we're not seeing that build up that we were when we were using the bore water with higher salinity. So the issues are still very much there. That they're still part of it. I mean, usually we just hope for high winter rainfall and we don't have to deal with them. But yes, we certainly have the impacts. We've also had growers who still have just bore water, who have built us desal plants in their vineyards. They're actually removing the salt from that bore water, and that's been very successful. Typically their vineyards were quite sort of, I guess, salt ridden. They had the impacts of salt, which affects sort of leaves and canopy and fruit, and now they've actually been able to flush that through their vineyards with better irrigation water. So yes, still an issue here. Yes, there are things that we can do to combat it around our water supply, but we tend to find it kind of fluctuates with the cycles of the seasons, depending on how dry it is.
Excellent. My next question relates to regenerative viticultural practices, and there's a lot being talked about in Europe about what we can do in that. And again, it comes back to soil health and soil texture. And I was wondering if any of the growers are using like grazing animals or anything like that to help soil quality, because we've been seeing some good results elsewhere in the world in that. And is that being adopted? Or?
Yeah, it definitely is, and probably at quite a fast rate. So what's interesting about an old region, a very historic region in the Barossa, is there was really lack of fences. So which you might sort of think, you don't have your property fenced off and this is mine and that's yours, but no, really here, one row to the next row was a change of ownership and a change of owner. So what we're now sort of seeing is a lot of people are fencing their properties. They want to go down that kind of minimal impact. So the use of sheep grazing is probably the greatest sort of regenerative farming that we're using here, or starting to really move and adapt here. It reduces so many things. Like, it's not just about kind of what's been eaten is going back in, the nitrogen's going back into the soils, what's coming out staying there. It's not just about that footprint, but it's also about, significant reduction in herbicide use, keeping our vineyards kind of clean. It's a significant reduction in our footprint of our machinery, because we're not having to slash the grass as much. We're not having to cultivate and things like that. So there is so much benefit behind it here, that there's a really big uptake. Ourselves, we do a lot of it across our own vineyards as well, and we're really seeing growers, they're investing in that fencing, they're investing in that protection, to be able to do that, which is, it's really exciting. I know there's a company or some sort of growers that are actually now experimenting with the baby doll sheep. which have been pretty popular in New Zealand and beyond. And so I guess the purpose behind that is to actually have the sheep in the vineyard for longer because they're smaller. So it actually allows them to stay right past bud burst, when typically larger sheep actually can cause damage to grapevines, and well, literally they eat the shoots of grapes. So there's lots of things going on in that space, but that one in particular is quite significant here. So
that sounds great, Jade.
Yeah,
I look forward to seeing some little pictures of those baby doll sheep. That sounds great.
Cuteness
and my
factor
final
is a big
question.
thing.
My final question is, I suppose, a personal one for you. What has you most excited about the future of sustainability in Barossa? Like, what really grabbed you in terms of this is really going to help deliver for the generations to come?
Yeah, I think, look, definitely the adaptation of Sustainable Wine Growing Australia across the broader grower group and companies, and this goes far beyond just Peter Lehmann's. I think that's really exciting because I think it's something that Australia's really needed for a while, and I know it's been around for a while, but I feel like its adoption now is really taking off. And with that brings change. It's not just about a certification, but it's about the changes that happen within that. And that's something that's been, that's always been at the forefront of my mind for the growers here, is the adaptation to change, wanting to take on some of these principles, wanting to do better. So for me, that whole piece and what it's going to bring about for the better of this region, sustainability wise, is significant. It's massive. So, I hope the rest of my time in this industry that we can really see that change, and for a region like Barossa, it's significant. So yeah, that's something. Excellent. That's watch the space, I think. Going to be some cool stuff.
No, that's excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jade. I think I've said to a colleague of mine recently that anytime I speak to Jade, I feel like I learn something new, and that's not that common in the wine trade for me these days, but you're always an amazing font of knowledge. So I just want to thank all of the attendants today as well. I mean, it's really great to have this opportunity to explain to you what we're doing at Peter Lehmann, and to thank the wonderful Jade. And if you've got any other queries, please feel free to contact me or your rep so that we can follow up on that, because we're very proud of the progress that's been made. And with that in mind, I think it's very close to saying goodbye and many thanks.